Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, for holding this hearing today. Thank you to Mr. Mulvaney, Mr. Swikert for these proposals. I'd like to, I got to admit, I don't know a lot about BDCs, and so I've found this, your testimony very interesting. And I have just really two questions. One is to you, Mr. Foster. On page 5, I'd like to understand a little bit about how these BDCs are operating in my area. I'm the representative from the state of Delaware, the whole state. It's a very small little place. But I notice on here it's got a pretty big number under it on your map on page 5, particularly relative to states that are much, much larger. Can you explain that? Is that a function of our fact that we are the state to incorporate your business? Does that have anything to do with that, or is that a function of greater BDC activity in my state?
I can't really explain why there's I guess it says $1.5 billion.
Yeah, we're doing better in New Jersey, Connecticut, Maryland, just about.
But maybe one of the two Michaels.
Anybody else? Mr. Gerber, you're from our region, right?
Yeah, I think what Mr. Foster wanted to say, it's the excellent representation in Congress that is driving the heavy investment in Delaware. No, I think you hit the nail on it.
Flattery will get you everywhere, but you can't vote for me.
At Franklin Square, we have a portfolio company. It's U.S. Coatings Acquisition. I do think it's in part because of the corporate laws in Delaware and the number of firms that are headquartered there.
That these are domiciled in some kind of way.
I think that's exactly right. Now, in our case, our investment has more to do with just the work that is done at the portfolio company, but I think the phenomenon you referenced is...
Obviously, you're located in our region. Is most of your activity in the region?
No, as I mentioned so earlier in my testimony, we've deployed capital in 39 of the 50 states, and between the three of us and our entire industry, we've invested in companies in all 50 states. I think it probably depends on the scale of the BDC. In our case, we have the largest platform. We have national reach, so we're sourcing deals all over the country.
So I think this is a pretty reasonable approach to updating regulations for BDCs. I do share Mr. Himes's concern about the leverage question. So I'd like to kind of follow up where he left off, which was, is there a way, Mr. Gerber, you started to respond to how you might consider addressing that concern. Would you like to follow up on that, or Mr. Argetti or Mr. Foster, would you like to address that?
I'll give a couple of comments.
Please.
And it harkens back to some of my earlier
just gives us a little heartburn, you know.
Yeah, I think anybody here would struggle to actually get leverage on the types of investments that you're expressing concern over. So first and foremost, the draft legislation, as I read it, excludes CLOs, and Representative Himes mentioned CLOs. That's excluded. However, Ares is actually one of the larger CLO managers in the broadly syndicated market, and getting leverage on a CLO equity investment is not possible in the market. So it goes back to some of the natural governors that exist in both the banking sector and the investment-grade bond sector that regulate what can and can't be leveraged. So if we put together a portfolio that was 50% CLO equity, even though it's excluded, but for argument's sake, if we did, and we took that portfolio to the rating agencies and the bank, we would not have an investment-grade rating, and we would not be able to get a loan on it. So you should...
So there are market-based controls on that, is what you're saying?
Yes, market-based bank and capital markets.
Gentlemen, yield for a second, Mr. Carney.
Sure, absolutely.
Very briefly, and I appreciate the question, because I was hoping to get to this when Mr. Himes was still here. The draft legislation specifically excludes investments in CLOs, hedge funds, and private equity. So some of the examples he gave would not have been permitted under the draft legislation.
Great. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll add. I think it's, we've given some thought about it. I think it's theoretically attractive to provide the 1-to-1 to the 70, but not the 30. But if the 30 gets bigger, then the bill begins to lose its effectiveness. And I am concerned because most of us are owned, all of us are owned primarily by retail investors, and they get 1-to-1 or they get 2-to-1. But when you start explaining the baskets and how we're going to report that to them and how we're going to monitor it and what it does to this, I don't think it's a practical solution.
So maybe what we could do is get some feedback to those members who have concern. I'm looking at the sponsor just to give us some level of comfort that that's great. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.